What we're going to do is look at another way of solving quadratic equations, and this is using completing the square. Now, the process is that our first step is going to be divide by our a value. So we have our quadratic equation. Our a value is the number in front of x squared, and we divide each of them by our a value. Now, our next step is we're going to be finding a new c value. That uses the formula b over 2 squared. So our b value is 2. What we're going to do is we're going to divide it by 2 and square it. And in that case, it gives us a 1. So 4 plus 1 gives us a 5. Then we're going to factor. Two numbers that multiply together give us 1, add up to 2. If we're doing it correctly, they should both be the same. And so we create a square binomial. That's why it's called completing the square. Now, in order to get rid of a square, we take the square root. Remember, there's a positive and a negative root. And then we finish it off by subtracting the 1. So that's the process that we're going to go through. So if we look at our first example, this is a little bit easier because the a value is 1, so we can skip the first step. And what we're going to do is we're going to find our new c value. So we're going to take the negative 4 divided by 2, and we're going to square it. Negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2. Squared gives us a 4. So we have x squared minus 4x plus 4 equals 1 plus 4. Then what we're going to do is we're going to factor it. Two numbers that multiply together give us 4. Add up to negative 4 would be negative 2 and negative 2. So we write our square binomial, x minus 2 squared is equal to 5. Then, in order to get rid of the square, we take the square root. And when we take the square root, we have to remember to write our positive and negative root. And our last step is we add the 2. So we have x equals 2 plus or minus the square root of 5. Now for letter B, it's a little bit more complicated. When we're looking at it, notice that we have an a value. So we're going to divide all of them by 2. And that gives us x squared minus 4x is equal to negative 20. We're going to find our new c value. So we're going to take the negative 4, divide it by 2, and square it. And that gives us a 4. So we have x squared minus 4x plus 4 equals negative 20 plus 4. We're going to factor. Two numbers that multiply together give us 4, add up to negative 4. We get negative 2 and negative 2. Remember, if we're doing it correctly, it's always going to be the same number because our goal is to come up with a square binomial. And then we're going to get rid of the square by taking the square root. That gives us x minus 2 equals. We're going to put the plus or minus. Whenever we have a negative, it's I. Square root of 16 is 4, so that would be 4i. And our last step will be adding the 2. And when we add the 2, what we get is x equals 2 plus or minus 4i. Now, letter C. What we're going to do is we're going to look at our a value. We see that it's 2, so once again, we divide it by 2. And that gives us x squared plus 3x plus 10 equals 0. I'm going to move the 10 over. So x squared plus 3x is equal to negative 10. I'm going to find my new c value. So c is equal to 3 over 2 squared. And that right there is going to give me 9/4. So I have x squared plus 3x plus 9/4 is equal to negative 10 plus 9/4. So I'm looking for two numbers that multiply together, give me 9/4 and add up to 3, and that would be 3/2. So what we have is x plus 3 over 2 squared is equal to, I'm going to find a common denominator. So that would be negative 40 over 4. And then I have plus 9 over 4. So looking at this right here, the next thing that I'm going to do, oops, That was a 15, not a 10. So that should be a 15, which means that that would be a 60. So it should be a negative 60. So our next step is that we take the square root. And when we take the square root, we get x plus 3 over 2 is equal to plus or minus. Then we have negative 60 plus 9 is negative 51 over 4. And our last step is subtract the 3 halves. So we have x equals negative 3 halves. We have the plus or minus. The negative gives us an I. We have the square root of 51, and the square root of 4 is 2. Pause the video and see if you could do the next two. Looking at letter D, once again, a little bit easier because our A value is 1, so we don't need to divide anything by our A value. Our next step is we're going to find the C value, negative 6 divided by 2, and we're going to square it. Negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. Squared gives us a 9. So we have x squared minus 6x plus 9 equals 1 plus 9. Then what we're going to do is we're going to factor it. So two numbers that multiply together give us 9, add up to negative 6, which would be negative 3 and negative 3. So we have x minus 3 squared is equal to 10. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the square root, and I get x minus 3 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 10. And then my last step is I'm going to add the 3. And I get x is equal to 3 plus or minus the square root of 10. Okay, the last one. First thing I'm going to do is divide by my A value. So I get x squared plus 4x plus 10 is equal to 1. I'm going to subtract the 10 on both sides. So x squared plus 4x is equal to negative 9. I'm going to find my new C value. I'm going to take the 4 divided by 2, and I'm going to square it, and that gives me a 4. So I have x squared plus 4x plus 4 equals negative 9 plus 4. Whatever we add to one side, we add to the other. Then when we factor it, two numbers that multiply together give us 4, add up to 4 would be 2 and 2. So that would be x plus 2 squared. Remember, whenever the numbers are the same, it gives us a hint we're on the right track. And then it adds up to negative 5. We take the square root. That gives us x plus 2 is equal to plus or minus. The square root of a negative is I, and then we have 5. And our last step is subtract the 2. So x equals negative 2 plus or minus I square root of